Hey everyone, the Still Got It podcast is brought to you by Sutton Basketball Academy, where the next generation of hoopers are made. Whether you're just picking up a ball for the first time or chasing a college scholarship, our year-round academy trains boys and girls ages 5 through 18 to become peak performers both on and off the court. At Sutton Basketball Academy, it's bigger than the game. We build skills, confidence, and character that will last a lifetime. Learn more at SuttonBasketballAcademy.com. Hey everyone, welcome to the Still Got It podcast, where we sit down with former college hoopers to relive their journey, from playground dreams to big-time college moments and beyond. Each episode, we dig into players' early days in the game, the recruiting process, that first taste of life in college, and the highs and lows of their playing career. We'll also look at what came after the final buzzer, life beyond basketball, and where the game has taken them since. I'm your host, Nick Sutton, and this is Still Got It. Real stories, honest reflections, and a deeper look at the game beyond the box score. And if you're enjoying what you're hearing, be sure to like and subscribe.
So when you did come back to the team, like you kind of touched on, it was loaded. You had Brand, I think Batty was there too, Trajan, Nate James. What was it like walking back into the locker room after that suspension? I mean, did you feel pressure, more motivation to prove that you didn't lose your spot, or, just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was tough. I mean, like I said, junior year we were stacked, and then senior year we were super stacked. I don't know if that's even a word. Stacked and super stacked. But that's how good we were, our senior year. We're ranked number one in the country when I come back, and there's really not a spot, for me. I remember my first game back was against Mercer, and I hadn't practiced at all, the whole season. And so I'm coming in basically in street clothes. And, I don't know if I'm going to play. I mean, Mercer's not a great team. And so we're up 40. And he actually, puts me in the game for a little bit in the first half. And then I get an extended run in the second half. I think the last, 6 minutes of the game or something like that, because we're up by so much. And so I get a breakaway dunk. And I do a 360. And it's probably the second best dunk in Duke history. Zion's 360 was ranked number one when he does a 360 windmill. And they ranked me number second with the regular, 362 hand. And, I think I had 10 or 12 points in that game, and I played, pretty well. And so, I felt like I was back. But that was all adrenaline. When you haven't practiced and you haven't really trained like everyone else has, you can do superhuman things in a moment, but you can't consistently do those things because you're not in the shape to do that. And obviously not being able to practice with the team and do all those things, there's no way that I could be where they were physically and conditioning wise. And so that next week of practice, I was like, wow, this is tough. And I just could never catch up to everyone else who were 2.5, 3 months ahead of me.
Yeah. I can imagine that being tough for sure. Well, let's talk about UNC, 1998, Vince Carter, Antoine Jamison. When you think back, where does Vince rank in like the holy God, this guy's built differently category?
Yeah, Vince easily is the most athletic human being I've ever seen. And he is otherworldly in terms of athleticism. What's crazy is I was the host on his visit. Duke recruited him, and I was the host on his visit. Obviously he ends up going to Carolina, which is probably the best choice because of how things ended for him. But that team was special with Antoine Jamison, who was just kind of an enigma. I've never seen anybody with such an unorthodox game put up the numbers that he put up. His first and second jump were just unbelievable. On tip rebounds, able to shoot and rebound and get his own rebound and put it back in. He was just a master at doing that, little flip shots. I mean, it just looked ugly and unorthodox, but at the end of the day, 32, 18, 35, 10, 25, 20, I'm just unbelievable numbers. And then they had Ed Cota, who was a incredible floor general, and he was just throwing lobs and just running everything. Shammond
Williams? Yep. Shammond Williams.
So they just had it. and they were fun to play against.
Yeah. Well, then your final game in Cameron, Duke-UNC finale in Cameron, Duke wins, and it's your last game in the building. What was what was going through your mind as the buzzer sounded and you kind of hit you that, your Duke career was over?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, you spend 4 years there, blood, sweat, and tears, and you can't help but think about what's next. But you know that this chapter of your life is over. I'm a forever Dookie. I love the program. I love everything about being at Duke. And even though people will mention the suspension and some of the low points, there were far more high points at Duke than there were low points. And, I still graduated with a major in sociology, minor in history. And, those were easily the best 4 years of my life. But you can't help but when the buzzer sounds, you think about, well, what's next? Can I be a pro? I knew I was an NBA player, but I hadn't had the opportunity to really, show that I could do that since my sophomore year. And so I had, some proving, to do. What sucked is that year was also the NBA lockout. And so there was a draft, but nobody started playing until, late February. And so it was like one thing after another. Like, can I catch a break at some point? But, I was able to have a 9-year career overseas, a couple of, NBA tryouts, summer league opportunities, vet camps. But I was pretty much an overseas guy. And, it was a gratifying professional career.
Yeah. Well, first, let's get to the Kentucky Elite Eight game, which had to be a heartbreaker. I mean, two giants trading blows. Kentucky was down 18 the first half. They stormed back to win by 2, 86-84. When you look back on that game, I mean, how do you reflect on it? Does it still sting? Can you see any positives that came out of that battle for you and the program going forward?
Yeah, it definitely stings. We were in control of the game pretty much the whole way, up 18 with 6 minutes to go. And then they just started bombing away from three. Wayne Turner breaking us down off the dribble, and they were just kicking for threes left and right. And they got back into the game, and they got back quick. And that's one thing about a 3-point shot. Sometimes it could be the death of you, but, sometimes it can really ignite you because, if you're shooting threes and the other team is shooting twos or not scoring at all, you can get back in the game awfully quick. And then once they hit a couple of threes, the tide changed. We could just never recover. The silver lining in that is that, at least Kentucky goes on to win a championship. And it's not like we lost to some scrubs. We lost to the eventual champion that year. But it still stung that I felt like we were the better team.
Yeah. Well, now fast forwarding to your overseas career, you played professionally in Europe, Asia, kind of everywhere. And, maybe initially a lot of people who don't follow kind of overseas basketball, they might think of it as glamorous and cool living in another country when reality, it's kind of more of a grind. So kind of a 3-part question. One, what was the toughest part of being a kind of a journeyman pro, trying to carve out your career internationally? And then second and third, what international experience do you remember most fondly, and which one had kind of the most to be desired?
I mean, it's tough. You have to be in a certain type of mindset to play overseas because it's not the NBA. It's not NBA travel. It's not the NBA schedule. You don't have NBA, coaches. You don't have NBA trainers. The little things that you would expect, even that you have in college at the highest level that we played at Duke, you just don't have. I mean, I played on teams overseas where I taped my own ankles. You know what I'm saying? Where, I taped my own ankles. And so I was pretty damn good at taping ankles when it was all said and done. But I think missing your family, missing, the culture, the food, watching BET, turning on ESPN and watching that regularly. It's just different. But, I relish the fact that I could go to other countries and see other cultures. I think that was great. I think it's good to go somewhere else and then realize that you live in the best country in the world, in America, by seeing how other people, do it. And I wasn't in like horrible places, but I saw some things that were a whole lot different than you would see in the U.S. But overall, I enjoyed my experience. My 3 best places were France. I played in France 2 years. That was incredible. The Philippines was really, really nice. And then I would say Amsterdam. Amsterdam
Nice.
was a pretty cool city to be in. And so those three really stand out as like the best of the best for me in terms of basketball, the treatment, and the lifestyle. And it gave you the real feel of an overseas experience.
Yeah. What about one that kind of you were maybe itching to get out of there?
Yeah, rough spot.
The Ukraine. The
Ukraine.
Yeah, that was very, very, very tough to no one spoke English, just like now, war ravaged. And it was a tough place to be. So I couldn't wait to get out of that place.
Well, so how did you know, after your, lengthy international career, and how did you know when it was time to walk away? Was there a specific moment or just kind of a slow realization that maybe it was time to him him up?
Yeah, I think that's the hardest thing for any basketball player is knowing when to quit. I think in all sports, we all think, and because I was the best of the best pretty much my whole career, you never think it will end. And, I think LeBron is probably going through that right now, where he's thinking about at 40 years old, how long can I do this? And that's 40 years old, but you know this, Nick, at 33, 34, that's considered prehistoric in basketball, terms. And that's still a young man. But in basketball terms, you're considered prehistoric once you get into your low to mid 30s. And so once I got to that point, I just knew that, it was coming to an end. You start pump faking more, you start getting injured more, and that's
Takes
how
longer to
okay,
get healthy.
it takes longer to recuperate. And then you're just tired of the grind. You're overseas, you want to be home, and you want to have a family, you want to, start living a normal type life. And overseas, it's not normal. And so you just make those decisions somewhere in the mid 30s, and then you ride with it.
Well, so now post playing career, you've been up to some amazing things. One of which is you're running game ready skills and development in North Carolina, shaping young players. What part of your Duke journey shows up the most when you're coaching kids today?
Well, yeah, that has always been in me. I always worked Duke camp. I always found myself working with kids. I always found myself teaching and giving to the next generation. And to me, there's a passion for it. I love the game. I love talking about the game. I love watching it. I love teaching it. It's just oozing through my pores. And I never really wanted to be a bench coach. Obviously that's another way you can coach. Skill development was always more my thing. And because of the way that I communicate, it was just easier for me to go that way. And here in North Carolina, where I live in Charlotte, it's a big thing, where kids are looking at becoming, Division I players. They want to be professional players. Basketball is king here. And so you can't just show up and be a good basketball player. You have to have somebody walk you through how to do that, which is what today's trainer does. And so for me, it was an easy transition, and it was my calling. And so for the last 14 years, that's what I've been doing. And, it hasn't slowed. It's the way to go.
That's awesome. Yeah, I can definitely relate, and just, to a very, very small degree, but yeah, just finding that passion of, just helping kids get better on a daily basis, even if they're just beginners or if they're striving to make it to college or whatever. So that's really cool. But another thing that you've done recently is you've become an author. And you recently wrote Celebrate Your Wins, a book built around acknowledging progress and taking ownership of your journey. And the message hits especially hard coming from someone who lived the highs and the setbacks of elite basketball. So, what inspired you to write the book, and why was this the right moment in your life to put that message out into the world?
It's a great question. Celebrate Your Wins was my COVID project. And I think we all had a lot of free time during that 2-year period where, the world was shut down and we didn't have shit to do. And people that always told me that I should write a book. I'm an incredible storyteller and I have a lot of stories to tell. And my career is no different. And so they were like, oh, you should put this on paper. And so I thought about it and thought about it. And finally, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do it. And so there's a woman, her name is Elise K. Williams. She's my co-writer. And, together we just, put together, every moment of my life, starting at around 6 years old. And we put it on paper, all that I could remember. And we made it into what it is. And I couldn't be more happy about the end result. Celebrate Your Wins is a memoir about my basketball career. Some of the strategies I used to be really good in basketball and business. And then, like I mentioned earlier, some great storytelling. And as a result, the book is flying off the shelves, doing quite well. And then I had a chance to also do the audiobook, which I think is the best part about the project, where I actually narrated it myself. And I'm incredibly proud about that. And as a result, I'm getting asked to do speaking engagements and professional development. And that's kind of the lane that I'm kind of getting into. And really it's because of the book.
That's fantastic. Well, I mean, and writing a book, it forces you to slow down, to reflect, be honest with yourself. So looking back, what was the hardest chapter or message in Celebrate Your Wins for you to actually sit down and write? And what did you learn about yourself in the process?
Well, obviously, I think my basketball career was the tale of two halves, where you had a good freshman and sophomore year, personally, record-wise, our freshman year wasn't that good. And then sophomore year was my best year. I'm all ACC, defensive player of the year, and, I'm a pro prospect. And then, you get into your junior, senior year where you have a mistake your junior year that kind of leads into the dysfunction of your senior year. And so you have like a tale of two halves of your basketball career. And so coming to grips with that, and, we talked about this earlier, it's easy to point the finger at other people. But one of the things Coach talks about all the time, and that, everyone should do, is take accountability for the things that, that don't happen correctly in your life. And so, having to recount those things, obviously, brought up some memories. And then, relationships with family members, my dad specifically, we didn't have a great relationship, especially in my adult years. And so, these are the things that, but this is the trials and tribulations of life. I think there's a lot of people who have, a lot of good things going on, and then you have a couple blips, if you will. Recognizing those and acknowledging those and then fixing those are super important. But most importantly, what I learned in the book was, again, we talked about, some of the blips, but there were far more great things that happened in my career than, some of the blips that happened. And, you should take time to celebrate, the wins, the good moments of your life that you did really well and that you were successful at whatever it is that you were doing. And so really the book, captures that, and it teaches people, to do just that. You got to celebrate some of those good portions of your life.
Well, and to kind of close out the book, it can kind of feel like a playbook for mindset, gratitude, confidence, resilience for young athletes. So when you look at today's players, what part of the book do you wish every kid could internalize the most, and why?
I think it's the level of work that you have to put in to make it. You can't just show up. No one can just show up. No one is talented enough to do that. We talk to players all the time and about their dreams and aspirations. And, coach, I want to make my middle school team. Then after I do that, I want to make my high school team. Then after I do that, I want to be recruited by one of the Power 5 conference and be a Division I player. Then after I do that, I want to be a professional. And these are the things I hear from my kids that I train. I love that. I think these are all great goals. But I got to ask, what are you willing to do? What are you willing to sacrifice to make these things happen? And that's when it gets hairy. Well, I'm going to come to the gym at practice time, and then I'm going to work as hard as I can. Nah, that's not enough. Well, I'm gonna eat good and I'm gonna be in good shape. All right, that's good, but it's not enough. You have to work extremely hard, harder than you've ever worked, and put in more time and do more than everybody else if you want these things to happen. Then obviously you have to have the measurables, to be strong enough and tall enough and jump high enough to do it. And then we talked about this. You're going to have some luck, but a lot of this depends on how hard, that you work, and how far you will go. And so, really it's to get young people to understand that, it's going to be blood, sweat, and tears. You're going to have to put in extreme hours of work, uncomfortable work at times, to reach these goals and aspirations.
Yeah. And that kind of seems like the answer to my next question, which is like, what's the biggest lesson that young players don't understand about long-term success? It seems like, yeah, you can have these different goals and those are great, but you have to have those little goals in between to help you reach those. And you gotta have things that you sacrifice, and you gotta be doing things that others aren't doing to set yourself apart.
Well, we talked about this a little bit, Kobe Bryant.
Mm-hmm.
Who to me is one of the greatest players of all time. He's my second favorite player of all time, only to Magic Johnson, because I'm a Laker fan. And but Kobe's work ethic was world renowned, and he had mentioned several times in interviews that at times, he was a bad friend. He was a bad teammate. At times, he was a bad husband. Because his sole focus was to be the best basketball player ever. And so he had to sacrifice some of those relationships and sacrifice some of those things to become who he was. And, that sacrifice, can cost you a lot. But if you want to be where you want to be, this is what it takes. And obviously when he was done playing, a lot of that stuff was repaired and this, that, and the third. But in his peak, he was tunnel driven on being the best basketball player ever. And that meant not hanging out. That meant not drinking alcohol. That meant, everything consumed basketball wise he was doing, and everything not he was not doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a huge sacrifice that people are not willing to make.
Yeah.
And Kobe did that, and that's why he was so good.
Totally. Well, Ricky, we got our closing segments. We got 3 questions that we always ask our guests. First one is called Cameron Confessionals. It's a recurring segment where we ask our guests to take us inside the walls of Cameron Indoor. So what's a story you feel comfortable sharing, a locker room laugh, a humiliating moment, or a hidden memory that only the Brotherhood knows?
Yeah, there's so many. It would have to be against Michigan. I tell this story sometimes. When I caught Michigan my freshman year, they had the Fab Five. Okay. And so I caught Jimmy King and Ray Jackson, the last 2 members of the Fab Five. Okay. Jalen Rose, Chris Webber, Juwan Howard had already left to go to the NBA. Michigan is coming to play us in Cameron. And this is one of the few games that Coach coached before he was out. And he pulls me aside before the game. And he says to me, Ricky, you're better than Jimmy King. And I'm looking at him like, what the hell is this guy talking about? Jimmy King is fucking awesome. He is one of the Fab Five, the best player on this Michigan team. He's a senior, and he is all of that. Like, there's no way that I'm better than he is. And he's like, you're better than, I didn't say this, obviously, I'm thinking this. He says, Ricky, you're better than Jimmy King. I want you to go, and just play your game. And if you do that, we'll have a good chance of winning. So I'm like, this is a Jedi mind trick among Jedi mind tricks. And so I go, and hearing that, I just go and play freely. And I outplay Jimmy King in that game. And we beat Michigan. But I think Coach knew that if he somehow Jedi mind tricked me into thinking that I was better than Jimmy King, just maybe, I would have one of the better games of the year. And I did, and we beat Michigan. And it was just a moment for me personally, because that conversation gave me confidence and let me know that he believed in me and that he thought that I was better than Jimmy King. Whether it was true or not, it's what was needed to win that game. And to me, that's a great Coach K moment, that sometimes you have to trick your players into believing certain things in order to get the win. And two things happened. That happened, we won, and then it gave me great confidence, which led into, me having a pretty good freshman year.
Yeah, I was going to say that probably kind of was the start to a good series of games or a good season like you had that freshman year. So that is a really cool story. Another question that I like to ask my guests is the late, great Barbara Walters used to close her interviews, or a lot of her interviews, by asking the following question, which is, what is the philosophy or the philosophies by which you live your life?
I like that. I think one of my great quotes and mottos is, there's always a way. You just got to figure it out. There have been so many times that, I didn't know what was next. I didn't know what was coming. I'm in a situation. I don't know how to get out of it. I don't know what's going to happen. And I just had to take time to think about the avenues and the ways, to make this thing happen. And literally every time that I'm in a bind or it's tough or anything like that, I always think to myself, there's a way to get through this. You just got to sit down and figure out what it is. And sometimes it takes me a moment, but usually, I figure it out and I'm able to, make whatever it is that I need to happen. And I think one of that motto, helps me along the way.
That's fantastic. I love that. It's a great piece of advice. All right. Well, our signature closer, Ricky Price, you're a McDonald's All-American, dunk contest, one of the best high school players in the country, had a great Duke career, played overseas. Now you're training kids and writing books. Sitting here today, in any shape of the word or the phrase, on or off the court, does Ricky Price still got it?
Absolutely. Not so much on the court, but my mind is sharp, and I don't know. Nick, you're a great shooter. I might get you on horse, though. I might still get you,
sure you would.
in a game of horse. But no, I think in terms of my mind being sharp and my ability to help the next generation, there is no question that I still have it, and there's still more in the tank. And so I'm looking forward to, what the future holds for me. Is there a second book? Is there a new lane? Is there, whatever? I'm looking forward to what the next chapter holds.
Fantastic. Well, Ricky Price, thank you so much for being a guest on Still Got It. Be sure to reach out next time you come to Duke for a game, and maybe we can meet up.